Greetings. Welcome back to 50 years ago this month. Steve and I are discussing the top 10 of 1970s and what that is month for month. And so we're going to be talking about the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 from the week of April 16th, 1970.
Yeah, and so again, this is our look back at these popular songs, and we're also trying to think about what life was like, cultural, political, even economic trends of the 70s during our conversation. And it is, again, a kind of conversation as we go back and forth looking at what was popular in this era. Again, it was an era still dominated by radio, and so these popularity pop charts, very, very important. And so we're going to get started, and we're going to start the countdown. This takes us back again to mid-April. And so mid-April 1970, the Beatles were on the top of the charts with Let It Be. We talked about this, Dave, last month. And yeah, I don't know. Do we have any? Its appeal is enduring, right? I don't think we would disagree.
It was a huge
hit
and universally loved, I think.
I think that's largely the case. As I stated earlier, I'm a little bit indifferent to it, but there we go. So Beatles are at number one with Let It Be. Number two was the Jackson 5 from Gary, Indiana, with ABC. This was the second of their releases, it's a very interesting group, and I think today it's hard to fully embrace the Jackson 5 given what we know about Michael Jackson. But Dave, I think we'd agree that in 1970 the Jackson 5 were. I mean, they were just almost universally embraced.
Oh, they were huge, and rightly so. They had it all. It was the whole package. The choreography, five attractive young men, some great sounds, and of course, who could hardly be beat, who was just a kid. So.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. I mean, Michael is, in fact, almost all of them are really super young. Again, they were coached up by their father, Joe Jackson, and the stories about the Jackson 5 and their father, I think, are legendary, if not notorious.
Infamous,
and again, it's sort of hard to put yourself. I mean, they were very carefree. It was just explosive, kind of just amazing, kind of universally beloved kind of music. Again, it's just so hard to sort of see that today. Their first four singles, hit number one. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, and of course, Then I'll Be There. So everything that they touched really turned to gold in 1970. This particular song was written by Berry Gordy and his compatriots, the so-called Corporation. I think critics would argue that they're very much a kind of manufactured band, and I think maybe there's some truth to that. But I think their talent was undeniable. And this is also
actually being a family unit, and music was clearly a big part of their family life from forever. And as you said, Joe basically was raising his kids, all of his kids, and he had a lot.
Raising them all
to be pop stars.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's right. He was a kind of impresario. It's and again, they come from very humble means in Gary, Indiana. I was teaching years ago, and it was a geography class, and I made a joke about Macedonia, and led by Tito, who Joseph Brown's Tito, and then I said, he's the second most famous Tito in the world to Tito Jackson. And I had a young woman in my class come up to me afterwards and say that her grandmother lived across the, I guess across the alley or something from the Jacksons and Gary.
No way.
And that make her grandmother, in fact, knew them as young kids as growing up. And so, but again, the Jackson 5 ABC, again, real quickly too, this is also the era, early 1970s, where Jacksons then were, again, it's kind of a manufactured thing. They appeared on Saturday morning cartoons. They were in all sorts of variety shows. They were, the guest star, in almost every TV show for several years. They were simply everywhere.
Yeah.
I
read Michelle Obama's autobiography, and she talks about how huge they were for her and her friends, growing up, being at about the same age as Michael, and just seeing what a Black family was just exploding on the scene in the entertainment world. Huge role models, and they gave back too. They gave back to the community. Really, that's also incredible that they didn't forget where they came from. And
I think that's an excellent point. And I think the Jackson 5, the Jacksons as role models, I think is, again, sort of easy to forget. I mean, everything is overshadowed by Michael Jackson's debauchery. But there was something very powerful about the Jacksons, and certainly 1970 they were at the peak of their power. And number 3 is Norman Greenbaum's Spirit in the Sky. This is Norman Greenbaum is, in terms of sort of one-hit wonders, Norman Greenbaum is oftentimes sort of put at the top of that list. This was a massively popular song, but a peculiar one. So, Dave, you got a couple thoughts about Spirit in the Sky?
Yeah, well, it was, as you said, it was a worldwide hit. Achieved gold status in 1970 after selling 2 million copies. Was 15 in the Billboard Hot 100. In fact, it was number 22 in the Billboard Hot 100 of 1970.
Yeah.
So yes, very big. Came in at 333 of Rolling 500 greatest songs of all. So.
Well, really? Seriously?
Yes. So.
Wow.
Had some influence, and it's musically, I think it's a fascinating song.
I do too.
The Norman Greenbaum, who wrote and sang the song, he played the Fender Telecaster for that funky guitar sound that's so characteristic of Spirit in the Sky. It had a built-in fuzz box. So that's it.
Yeah.
Apparently he got the idea by watching some gospel singer on television, and he said, well, how hard can that be? And he said he wrote the words in 15 minutes. And the words are bizarre. They're just strange.
They are weird. They're super weird.
Spirit
I agree.
In the Sky. It's going to take care of you up to heaven. The strange part about, for me, even stranger than that, is that Greenbaum says, even years later, he gets letters from funeral directors telling him that it's the second most requested song for memorial services after Danny Boy. Well, I can't imagine having a funeral director play that for one of my loved ones, but okay, there it is. Obviously, other people.
No, I can't either. But I know that people are really attached to the song. It's. You hear it everywhere, even today. It's oldies radio, classic rock radio. It's just part of the playlist. But again, it's such a peculiar song. It's an unusually sounding song, and you talk about him trying to get a kind of gospel feel to it. He carries that off. It's really
it's got some great backup vocals from the Stoller sisters.
Yeah.
So it's that mix of gospel and rocky music. That's very unusual.
But
I'm listening to it. I'm just trying to bracket out the words, the text.
they are strange, and again, we would never hear from Norman Greenbaum again. But I guess, you know, well, I mean, he did achieve something. He did achieve. Now, at number 4 is well, it's Instant Karma.
Which we
Lennon.
also talked about last time.
Yeah, and so Lennon is starting to make his appearance as a solo artist on the charts. At
He was the first Beatle to have a million-selling hit after the breakup.
Yeah, and I think
with Instant Karma.
With Instant Karma, I think early on it appeared that the breakout performers, curiously, the breakout performers were sort of Lennon, Ringo, I guess to a degree Harrison, but McCartney, in terms of sort of single success, didn't have maybe as much. But I mean, all that would shift quite quickly, right at the beginning. Yeah. At number 5, Edison Lighthouse's "Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes," which we talked about a little bit again last month. Again, another one-hit wonder. At number 6 was Simon and Garfunkel's "Bridge Over the Troubled Waters." Again, a classic.
Number 1 hit for 1970.
Yeah.
Just cleared up at the Grammys. Yeah.
Yeah, again, another kind of, it becomes sort of the signature song from the era. And at number 7 then, yeah, enduring for sure. And at number 7 is, well, it's a very peculiar, not peculiar, it's a very powerful song, very song really from the era that just has a kind of lasting appeal, but from a very kind of troubled group in a way. It's Badfinger's "Come and Get It." And Dave, I know you got a couple thoughts about "Come and Get It."
Well, "Come and Get It" was kind of Badfinger's breakthrough into the international scene. They had been playing together already, but it's the first hit that they had under the new band name. And speaking of Paul McCartney, he wrote and produced this song at the Abbey Road studio on August 2nd, 1969, my 8th birthday.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
There you go. Anyway, McCartney had a contract to write 3 songs for a soundtrack to The Magic Christian with Peter Sellers and
Ringo.
Peter Sellers
and Ringo.
And Ringo Starr.
Oh, it's so horrible.
I've never seen it, but I'll take the word.
It's not good.
It's hard to believe that Peter Sellers made a terrible movie, but all right.
Real quickly, I think Peter Sellers made a bunch of terrible movies. I think if you look at his output in the 60s, it's pretty spotty. We could go on and on about this. I know that Sellers
maybe I just know the good stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you do. But he was surprisingly prolific. He took damn near every job that came his way. And a lot of the stuff was pretty forgettable. And I would say The Magic Christian's pretty forgettable. But what I guess is not forgettable is the soundtrack, which is, I guess, people still listen to. And so this "Come and Get It" thing is, it's, it has this kind of McCartney feel to it, doesn't it? It's very, very popish.
And I guess he actually, during the Abbey Road sessions, went into the studio, recorded this on his own without any of the other Beatles.
Yeah.
Because of course he's an accomplished musician. He can play just about anything he lays his hands on.
For sure.
He did the drum tracks and the bass, lead guitar. He did the whole thing by himself. Had it recorded in about an hour. And then he got Finger. He said, well, they were under contract with Apple. And he said, you guys can have this. We'll do it. I'll produce it. But you have to do it just like my demo.
Yeah.
And they did. So
that was wise. That was wise. Well, yeah. And that was a wise move on their part. Badfinger had several hits in the early 1970s. But they have a sort of a kind of star-crossed legacy with record label trouble, strife within the band, suicides within the band. There's a kind of, oftentimes Badfinger is sort of, is this kind of the bad luck band. I mean, but for as much, there's this dark cloud that sort of hangs over Badfinger. But by God, they had a lot of success in the early 70s. They put a lot of songs on the charts.
Really great songs, yeah.
Yeah, really did, yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned about McCartney and he's under contract, there is this sense that there is a kind of craftsmanship that is connected to McCartney. Very kind of Tin Pan Alley, a guy can, sit down there, roll up his sleeves and hammer away for 8 hours and come up with a song, much like, they did in the Brill Building. There's something about him that...
I think the kids don't overthink it. I think that was their thing from the beginning. Just do it. Just strum something else, see what you got. And it worked brilliantly, and it's continued to work for him for 60 years. So I mean, he has it. He has the gift, and even his throwaways. And I think "Come and Get It" is close to a kind of throwaway from McCartney. McDonald said it's the best unreleased Beatles song ever, because it was. It actually appears on a couple of their newer compilations as a song, although only
this would you could have seen this appear. You could have imagined this appearing on like an Abbey Road or something. It has that kind of
something.
So we have Badfingers coming again at number 7. At number 8 is the Friends of Distinction, an LA vocal group, and Love or Let Me Be Lonely. There were a bunch of vocal groups, African American vocal groups of this era that had a lot of chart success, pop chart success. Certainly, the Fifth Dimension comes to mind. And the Friends of Distinction, again, coming out of L.A., they had a fair amount of success on the R&B charts. Their other major pop hit was "Grazing in the Grass" from '69. Great, they put lyrics. Their lyrics were put to the Hugh Masekela song "Grazing in the Grass." Hugh Masekela is a South African instrumentalist, plays trumpet. In the early '60s, who hit the big time with this instrumental, and then a few years later they added lyrics to it. Again, it's but the name basically, Friends of Distinction is kind of one hit wonder. But again, this was a very ripe era for kind of up tempo kind of pop group vocal groups that had a lot of success. I mean, there's a whole host of them, right? Whether you're talking about Mamas and the Papas, the Harper's Bazaar. Just tons and tons of these groups. Some of them had more success than others. Apparently, as legend goes, the Friends of Distinction was discovered by Jim Browne, who was Jim Browne, the football player, Cleveland Brown, running back, who at this point was a kind of almost a kind of kingmaker. He had a presence in Hollywood. He was an actor. He was kind of a talent scout, kind of cultural advisor. He was very much a kind of almost a bigger in life character, and apparently Browne spotted them and got them signed. They recorded for RCA. I just want to make a comment about this. RCA, in terms of labels, RCA was never a very hip label. I mean, there were a number of labels where there was a lot of, their artists were compelling. You had labels like Columbia, right? The traditional label, but also, very powerful label, Atlantic, which was big into blues. Eventually, of course, groups like Zeppelin recorded on Atlantic. Asylum Records, David Geffen's label. But RCA was sort of kind of stodgy. And so...
my dad's label, I think, had a lot of the... I think wasn't Sinatra RCA, Andrew Williams? People like Williams, people like Elvis recorded on RCA in his later years. It was just
there was something about the RCA label that wasn't very cool. And so I just make note of that because there is, I think, a connection between artists and labels and some like Capricorn out of the South. Very, pushed a lot of boundaries. RCA didn't push many boundaries. But so you have Love or Let Me Be Lonely by Friends of Distinction. I just add one other thing. I actually know this song more from the almost note for note cover by Paul Davis in the early 1980s, but you have the Friends of Distinction, number 8. Then we have at number 9 a Canadian band who I believe is from Manitoba, the Guess Who, with double-sided hit American Woman and No Sugar Tonight. Thoughts about that, Dave?
Right, and American Woman was released in single August 13th, 1969, from the album, the same title, American Woman. Has an interesting genesis. It was improvised on stage.
Yeah.
Bachman had just broken the guitar and guitar string, restrung it, and was strumming just to tune it. And he liked, kept playing it so he wouldn't forget. The others came back on stage and just pointing in. It was a jam session, and he improvised on stage the lyrics. This was at the Broom and Stone curling rink in Scarborough, Ontario.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah,
there was a kid with a cassette recorder in the audience doing a little bit of bootlegging. They saw that and said, "Hey, can we have the tape? We need to know what it was that Randy just sung."
It's you've got the Guess Who that's and that song, by the way, knowing the origin of it, that makes complete sense because there is this I don't know, stream of consciousness kind of jam quality to the song. It's but it's one of their biggest hits, and the Guess Who had a pretty powerful presence in the late 60s and early 1970s. He had really two figures right in the Guess Who, Randy Bachman and the lead singer Burton Cummins, who dominated the group. But they had a real presence for quite a while. The other thing about the American Woman,
of course, it's been seen as an anti-American. Certainly anti-Vietnam. And American Woman, Stay Away From Me. I mean, that's fairly clear. Cummings, who sang the lyrics, who improvised the lyrics on stage, said it actually had nothing to do with anti-Americanism. But they had just been in the States. They had just done a tour of some big cities. And it was a completely different feel for them, a different vibe, and it felt a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
And so they were glad to be back in Ontario, back home. And he said, when he was singing, quote, "What was on my mind was that the girls in the States seem to get older quicker than our girls."
That's really
dangerous. When I said American Woman, Stay Away From Me, I really meant Canadian Woman, I prefer you.
It was a heavy era. I mean, it was a heavy era, and so that sense of kind of heaviness, of foreboding, is kind of there in the song. Again, like you're suggesting, it was seen as a kind of overtly a kind of political statement, and it clearly really wasn't, as he's riffing on stage. But it's just there's a lot of dread in the air, and it was just a hard time in the United States. And I am certain that spending any moment in Canada was almost like a breath of fresh air in 1970. It was just, almost oppressive in the U.S.
Well, and sitting in the audience listening to that were a bunch of draft dodgers from
of course. No, exactly right.
So it was very much an issue. Vietnam was on everyone's mind. And while the song was definitely not intended to be anti-American, I think it was, I think there was some anti-Vietnam sentiment being expressed there. Interestingly enough, they were asked to play at the White House on July 1770. Nixon requested that they not play that song. But they played.
Okay. They played the White House?
They played the White House, the Nixon White House.
I wonder if that request came from the girls, right? Trisha or Julie.
It probably wasn't.
That's peculiar, right? I mean, for one, I think it's an unusual request, and it's also, I think, kind of that they accepted is also.
Well, yeah, but
no,
again, they were not particularly political,
but they had eyes and ears. They knew how this would play.
It's an honor to play at the White House.
No, not in 1970.
Well, not 1970, not now, but okay, still, you know, if you're not political, maybe you still see it that way. What I find a little strange is that Pat Nixon was hip enough to know that American Woman was an anti-American song. Where'd she get that from? She wasn't sitting there with her headphones on and saying, wait a second, that sounds remotely anti-American.
This is the kind of thing, though, where they've got young girls. They hear something coming from down the hall. One of them was still at home, I think, in 1970. Anyway, that's a weird story, and I just hope, on some level, that their arms were twisted by their management. This is a gig you can't refuse, because that is so unbelievably uncool to play the Nixon White House. Oh, come on.
It's subversive.
Oh, okay. All right. Subversive. All right. Well, that would be my take 50 years later too. Yeah, we were. Yeah, that's right. All right. So the rest of the top 40 has, several, important, interesting songs. Probably at the top of the list as in terms of important songs in the top 40 in mid-April 1970 is Woodstock, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's version of the Joni Mitchell song Woodstock. It peaks at, I think it's at 17. I think it maybe peaks right around here.
Peaks at 11.
Okay, peaks at 11. This is a defining song of the era, one of the defining songs, and their version of it is particularly important. You got a couple thoughts about Woodstock. Woodstock.
Well, it's strange because, of course, Joni Mitchell was one of the few at the time that was not actually at Woodstock. She was
That's right.
From her hotel room and just really pissed off that she was missing it all. In fact, she had been together with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in Chicago the night before they left for Woodstock, and somewhere, it was also on the coast, but her manager wanted her to do the Cavett show. That was more important.
And to be fair to the manager for a second, the Cavett show was an important show. It was of the talk shows. It was the hippest of the talk shows.
The hippest, yeah.
And there was a kind of countercultural vibe that surrounded the Cavett show that didn't, didn't surround the Tonight Show and stuff. And so, it would be important, but.
And, you did not know going into Woodstock that was going to be the springboard for maybe a dozen careers.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think that's right.
It was the second live show the second live performance that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young had done. And of course, just huge, before an audience of 500,000. The first was in front of an audience of 500. So it was a huge leap for them. And they would have been huge anyway. I think there's no question about that. They would have been big, but Woodstock gave them a fantastic jump forward.
I think that's right. I also think that gave them a certain stamp of credibility. When you appeared at Woodstock, and that was as a kind of launching pad, there was, that was meaningful. And so to that degree, I think Joni Mitchell did lose out. You know, if Joni Mitchell had been on the stage for half an hour, 45 minutes of Woodstock, her career would have been very different. It had been it just would have been. And so they greatly benefited from this. There are several versions of Woodstock.
Joni Mitchell's version was actually the first one that was recorded.
Well, yeah.
For, Ladies of the Canyon, 1970 Ladies of the Canyon album. And it was actually the B-side of Yellow Taxi.
But, is that right? No, I didn't know that. Okay.
But compared to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, it sucked. It's just...
I couldn't disagree more.
A completely objective judgment.
I think that Joni Mitchell's version is the version. It is almost it's angelic. It so far surpasses.
It's almost painful.
No, you couldn't be more wrong about this. But maybe we can agree to disagree on this. I don't know, but yeah. I don't think question that the CSN&Y's version is the version that lingers in the culture and becomes, it is sort of an anthem. And so, like any documentary you see from this era, you know, there's, you know, if they can get the rights, there's that song is playing in the background. Well,
including as part of the soundtrack, I think the end credits for Woodstock has of a version of theirs playing over it. So yeah, of course, Neil Young played the opening and the guitar solo. Stills sang lead. Yeah, it's an important song, and it is a little surprising that it never got any higher than 11. But you know, it is one of these songs from the era. Why did Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young get the song? Why was it presented to them as opposed to another group? Well, so you ask. I think it's because at that time, Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell were lovers. I think that's right. Is it? Graham Nash he's still very very unhappy with the breakup. It appears, if you look at interviews decades later. Has he seen Joni Mitchell recently? Oh, I know. I know what you're saying, but when she left, it just crushed him. It appears. I mean, and so their relationship. That's Our House comes from their time together and all. Yes, that's right. It's the whole Laurel Canyon thing. It was, you know, it's where the group got together, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stories about, you know. David Crosby was together with her before Nash was. So she had romantic relationships with CSN&Y, and with a number of other musicians of the time. There's a lot of cross-pollination on a number of levels, and it all really stems from the fact that so many of these people lived in the Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles area. It was just where it was happening. A Paris salon, just spread in a way. Yeah, it was like that. You know, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assessment. It's and I think we're still played a huge role. In fact, I think Mama Cass in a way was the kind of the godmother of her house. Was kind of the headquarters for a lot of that. She was always inviting people, always having big parties where all these people know each other. In fact, David Crosby and Stephen Stills met Graham Nash at Mama Cass's place. That's right. That's I think Mama Cass. Man, she's sort of disappeared from history, but her role in the late '60s, in terms of not just as a performer, but as again a kind of conduit, of relationships, bringing people together, I think is enormously important. I mean, in a way, she's kind of one of the most pivotal people of the '60s. Yeah, the music scene, I think. Yeah, it's super important.
Also coming from Los Angeles, from the SoCal area, is a group that's at number 22. I just wanted to talk just briefly about Celebrate and Three Dog Night. Comes from the LP Suitable for Framing. Three Dog Night was a group. They were an act of three vocalists, Chuck Negron, Corey Wells, and Danny Hutton. They also, of course, had, there was a band, but the vocalists so overshadowed the band that they were essentially invisible. But Three Dog Night was a band. One of the things that made Three Dog Night interesting was that they were interpreters of songs of up-and-coming songwriters, most notably people like Randy Newman, Laura Nyro, Paul Williams. Celebrate, though, is written by Alan Gordon and Gary Booker, and maybe a little bit less notable in that regard. But Celebrate is sort of classic Three Dog Night. Vocalists out in front. You've got Hutton and Negron sharing the lead vocal. It's there's a kind of up-tempo, kind of feel-good song. There is about a couple minutes into the song, there is an instrumental kind of break, and it's some horns come in, and those are actually the horns from the group Chicago that contributed to this song a little bit. But the Three Dog Night, boy, they had just monster hits in this era, right? The charts of the early 70s are just dominated by Three Dog Night tunes. Shambhala. After
the Monkees, the Three Dog Night was my second favorite group. The Monkees were my first favorite group, the first group that I really took any notice of, and then Three Dog Night came along and kind of took over their place in my music consciousness, because I was a top 40 kid. I was a radio kid.
Right.
Anything that I knew about music, I got on top 40 radio stations. And as you said, Three Dog Night was fairly dominant there for a while.
They really were. They were all over AM radio. They seemed, though, to in terms of sort of hipness, they weren't the coolest band around. They were a kind of band. There was music that your folks could listen to, your parents could listen to, and not be completely.
My folks did, not so much.
But okay, but there. I think that in terms of when we've talked about this a little bit, groups that were really part of the scene. I don't think Three Dog Night was ever part of the scene. I thought they were interesting. I really liked them too as a kid. But I also know that there are as many people who despise Three Dog Night and see their music as completely sort of manufactured and homogenized, and to take the acidic lyrics of somebody like Randy Newman, and Mama Told Me Not to Come, or Laura Nyro, and then just sort of. Brilliant. And then they take the edge out of them. That's so their critics say.
I don't think that's true. I think Mama Told Me Not to Come is exactly as interpreted exactly as it should. I just think it's brilliant. I get that, but it's the sort of thing that I heard in college too about commercial music. This commercial is bullshit. And I just don't think it's true. I didn't buy it then, and I don't buy it now. I think that Three Dog Night holds up really well, as opposed to someone like maybe the Partridge Family, who was also I loved the Partridge Family back in the day. I actually bought a Greatest Hits, and it's not so easy to listen to anymore. But
I don't disagree with you that the Partridge Family doesn't hold up, but I do think that many people didn't think that Three Dog Night was particularly cool. I enjoyed them, and for me, I had a friend down the street who was about maybe 5 years older. He had albums. He had a number of Three Dog Night albums, and I remember just looking, over, reading the liner notes and all that kind of stuff. I thought they were, they were hip. But so there you have it. Celebrate. celebrate at 22. We have two more songs I wanted to get to here. One is a regional band called the Ides of March, band out of Chicago, 32 in mid-April. Is this Ides of March in their song Vehicle. And it's, again, a band out of Chicago. They had a number of regional hits back in the day when a band could still, have a really strong kind of regional presence. Radio was such that while there were clearly national charts, there are also then local charts. And the Ides of March really dominated that sort of that Lake Michigan area for a long time. Vehicle would eventually
WLS.
And WLS. I thought, I was actually going to mention it. This powerful grade 89 WLS out of Chicago, AM radio, booming through the Midwest at night. Right, Larry Lou Jack and all these DJs. It was everybody listened to WLS, right?
I certainly did.
I certainly did too. And so this is where I first heard the Ides of March Vehicle on WLS. They were led by a guy by the name of Jim Petrick. And Petrick is kind of the Zelig of music in the 70s and 80s. He also then fronted a band called Survivor. Eye of the Tiger, a number of hits in the early 1980s. But Vehicle is, at one time it was considered, it was a massive hit. And for a small band in Chicago, this is really, it was really big thing. One other thing about the Ides of March is that they participated in the Festival Express concert tour in Canada in early 1970. And if this rings a bell to anyone, it's because there was a movie released in the early 2000s, the Festival Express documentary. It was the Grateful Dead, the band, Janis Joplin, Traffic as well were a part of the Festival Express. And what it was a series of concerts in Canada, and they traveled from show to show on a train devoted just for the artists. And so it was full of, and so the film then, Festival Express, depicts then this kind of rolling caravan of debauchery, where there would be these moments of just sort of these jam sessions. And so I highly recommend the film Festival Express. There weren't actually very many shows. If you look at the Festival Express concert series, there are only 3 or 4 shows that actually took place. It was really kind of a failed effort. But the intimacy that you see between the artists, particularly between the members of the band and Janis Joplin and also the Dead, really interesting. And actually, it got me to be a bigger Janis Joplin fan than I was before. But the Ides of March were on that bill, and so if nothing else, I would encourage you all to take a look at Festival Express.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, it sounds really good.
It's really worthwhile. At 35 is from the George Baker. Yeah, George Baker selection, the Little Green Bag. And I confess I know nothing about this song, but apparently I'm like the only person in the world who doesn't know much about this. So the Little Green Bag,
Little Green Bag was written in 1969 by Jan Visser and Hans Browne, who took on the artist's name, George Baker. So these were Dutch musicians. It was recorded by the George Baker selection at their own cost. So, they didn't have a record company contract. The original title was Little Greenback. And the first line of the song was, looking back on the track for Little Greenback. Well, because they're Dutch, Greenback could sound a little bit like Green Bag. Was released with the erroneous title Little Green Bag. And from that point on, it was only ever known as Little Green Bag, which was, of course, then widely interpreted to refer to a little plastic bag of marijuana.
Of course. Well, absolutely.
Yeah. peaked at number 16 on the Cashbox chart, and actually reached number 3 in Belgium. Great Belgium hit. Where most people like me know about it is from the soundtrack to Reservoir Dogs, not from 1992. Big soundtrack. It's one of the things that Tarantino does really well is pick out music for his films, and Reservoir Dogs was a fantastic soundtrack. And Little Green Bag was. The soundtrack actually had Stephen Wright as a radio disc jockey playing these songs. Now from 1970, Little Green Bag by the George Band. You know, Stephen Wright, his thing of being very, very mellow, very laid back.
Yeah, Stephen Wright, the comic from Boston. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so this radio station was playing in the background while they were torturing a cop.
Well, I was completely unfamiliar with this, and I've not seen.
Reached number 1 in Japan after being used for a whiskey commercial there. So it's enjoyed a couple comebacks.
Well, absolutely. And so, I mean, nothing like being on a soundtrack of a Tarantino album, I suppose, to boost one's fortune or one's royalty payments or something. So, yeah. Well, there you have it. April 1970. A month of highs and lows. What we'll do here soon is to take a look at mid-May 1970. And May 1970 in the United States was a catastrophic month for a variety of reasons. And we'll see, I think, in the charts, the politics of the day. So looking forward to talking with you soon, as we will next delve into mid-May 1970.
Right, coming up next month. So,
all right.
See you all then.
Thanks. See you then.